Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that gets lost behind the golden masks and the secret tombs. Not the drama, but the rhythm. Specifically, the great, slow pulse of the Nile. The predictable, patient, and life-giving flood that set the clock for an entire civilization for 3,000 years. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's long journey together. Our story begins not with towering pyramids or mighty pharaohs, but with the land itself. For the story of ancient Egypt is inextricably linked to the lifeblood of the region, the majestic Nile River. For thousands of years the Nile has flowed. From the heart of Africa to the Mediterranean Sea, a shimmering ribbon of life in a vast desert. Its predictable annual floods, a gift from the gods in the eyes of the ancient Egyptians, deposited fertile black silt upon its banks, creating a verdant paradise in an otherwise arid landscape. This rich soil, known as Kemet, or the Black Land, was the foundation upon which Egyptian civilization was built. Beyond it lay the Desert, the Red Land, the vast and unforgiving desert that protected the nascent civilization from invasion and isolated it, allowing a unique and powerful culture to flourish. Long before the first pharaohs, in the mists of prehistory, the banks of the Nile were home to nomadic hunter-gatherers. They roamed the land, following the herds of animals and gathering the wild plants that grew in abundance. But as the climate of North Africa grew more arid around 8000 BC, these early people were drawn ever closer to the life-giving waters of the Nile. They began to settle in small communities, to cultivate the fertile land and to domesticate animals. This was the dawn of agriculture in Egypt, a pivotal moment in its history that laid the groundwork for the great civilization to come. The Predynastic period of Egypt, stretching from roughly 6000 BC to 3100 BC, was a time of immense change and innovation. It was during this long expanse of time that the scattered agricultural communities along the Nile evolved into a complex society with a distinct culture, religion, and social structure. Archaeologists have divided this period into several cultural phases, named after the sites where their remains were first discovered. One of the earliest of these cultures was the Bedouin culture, which emerged in Upper Egypt around 4400 to 4000 BC. The Bedouins were skilled farmers who cultivated wheat, barley, and lentils, and they were also accomplished artisans. They produced a distinctive type of pottery, thin-walled and elegant, with a ripple-like surface that shimmered in the light. They buried their dead in simple graves, often with a few personal belongings, such as combs made of bone and ivory, and pallets for grinding cosmetics. These early burials suggest a nascent belief in an afterlife, a belief that would become a central tenet of ancient Egyptian religion. The Bedouins also created some of the earliest known examples of glazed steatite beads, a testament to their early mastery of complex craft techniques. Following the Bedouins, the Naqada culture arose and flourished in Upper Egypt. From about 4000 to 3000 BC, the Naqada period is further divided into three sub-periods: Naqada I, Naqada II, and Naqada III. The Naqada culture saw a significant acceleration in social and technological development. The settlements grew larger, evolving into bustling towns with specialized craft industries. Pottery became more elaborate, decorated with intricate paintings of animals, boats, and human figures engaged in various activities. These painted scenes provide us with a tantalizing glimpse into the lives and beliefs of these early Egyptians. We see boats, for instance, which were not just a means of transport, but also a potent symbol of the journey through life and the afterlife. During the Naqada II period, from about 3500 to 3200 BC, the pace of change quickened even more dramatically. Trade flourished, not just along the Nile, but also with neighboring regions such as Nubia to the south and the Levant to the east. This trade brought new materials, such as obsidian and lapis lazuli, and new ideas into Egypt. The society became more stratified, with a clear elite class emerging. The tombs of the elite grew larger and more elaborate than the simple graves of the common people. They were often filled with a rich array of graves, including finely crafted pottery, stone vessels, weapons, and jewelry. These tombs, such as those found at Hierakonpolis, the ancient city of Nekane, are a clear indication of the growing power and wealth of the ruling class. It was also during the Naqada II period that we see the first signs of a developing writing system. Early hieroglyphs, simple pictographic signs, began to appear on pottery and labels. These early signs were likely used for administrative purposes, to record the ownership of goods or to denote the contents of a jar. But they were the seeds from which the complex and beautiful hieroglyphic script of ancient Egypt would grow. The final phase of the pre-dynastic period, Naqada III, from about 3200 to 3000 BC, was a time of intense political consolidation. The small independent chiefdoms that had dotted the Nile Valley for centuries began to coalesce into larger kingdoms. Powerful rulers emerged, vying for control of territory and trade routes. It was a time of conflict and competition, but also of cultural fusion and political innovation. Two major kingdoms eventually emerged, one in Upper Egypt in the south, with its capital at Hierakonpolis, and another in Lower Egypt in the north, centered in the Nile Delta. The rulers of these two kingdoms, whose names are lost to history, are often referred to as the Scorpion Kings, a name derived from the scorpion, symbol found on some of their artifacts. The most famous of these is the scorpion macehead, a carved limestone artifact that depicts a king wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt and holding a hoe, perhaps symbolizing his role in the agricultural prosperity of his kingdom. The culmination of this long process of state formation was the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt into a single kingdom. This momentous event, which marks the beginning of the early dynastic period and the dawn of pharaonic civilization, is traditionally attributed to a king named Narmer. Narmer's legacy is immortalized on a magnificent ceremonial palette, the Narmer Palette, discovered at Hierakonpolis. This remarkable artifact, carved from a single piece of siltstone, is one of the most important historical documents from ancient Egypt. The Narmer Palette tells the story of the unification in a series of powerful and symbolic images. On one side, we see Narmer wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, his arm raised to smite an enemy. Below his feet are two vanquished foes. On the other side, Narmer is depicted wearing the red crown of Lower Egypt, inspecting a procession of his soldiers and the decapitated bodies of his enemies. The palette also features two mythical creatures with intertwined necks, a symbol of the unification of the two lands. The Narmer palette is a masterpiece of early Egyptian art and a powerful piece of royal propaganda. It proclaims the military might of Narmer and his divine right to rule over a united Egypt. With the unification of Egypt under Narmer, a new era in human history began. A single pharaoh now ruled over the entire length of the Nile Valley, from the first cataract at Aswan to the Mediterranean Sea. A centralized state was established with a sophisticated bureaucracy to manage its affairs. A new capital city, Memphis, was founded at the apex of the Nile Delta, strategically located to control both Upper and Lower Egypt. The unification was not just a political event. It was a profound cultural transformation. The dualistic nature of the country, the two lands of Upper and Lower Egypt, became a central theme in Egyptian ideology and art. The pharaoh was the lord of the two lands, and the iconography of the unified kingdom, such as the double crown, the pient, which combined the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, reflected this duality. The early pharaohs of the first and second dynasties who ruled from Memphis consolidated their power and laid the foundations for the great achievements of the Old Kingdom. They built elaborate tombs at Abydos and Saqqara, the precursors to the pyramids. These tombs, known as mastabas, were rectangular structures with flat roofs and sloping sides built over a subterranean burial chamber. They were filled with all the things a king would need in the afterlife: food, drink, furniture, weapons, and even sacrificed servants and officials. A practice that was abandoned in later periods. The early dynastic period was a time of consolidation and innovation. The art of writing was further developed, and the hieroglyphic script became more standardized. The Egyptians developed a sophisticated system of administration and taxation. They undertook large-scale construction projects, such as irrigation works and temples. They established trade links with foreign lands, importing timber from Lebanon and other exotic goods. The dawn of Egyptian civilization was a long and complex process, a journey from scattered farming communities to a powerful and unified state. It was a journey shaped by the geography of the Nile, by technological innovation, by trade and conflict, and by the emergence of a powerful ideology of kingship. The unification of Egypt under Narmer was the culmination of this journey, the moment when Egypt truly became Egypt. It was the beginning of a civilization that would endure for 3 millennia, leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire awe and wonder to this day. And so the stage was set for the next chapter in our story, the age of the pyramids, the Old Kingdom, when the pharaohs would rise to become living gods on earth and build monuments that would stand for eternity. But that is a story for another time. For now, let us rest in the quiet dawn of this magnificent civilization, in the land of the pharaohs, where our journey has just begun. The foundations laid during the early dynastic period were not merely of stone and mud brick, but of ideology and governance. A unified Egypt, ruled by a single divine king, now possessed the stability and the resources to dream on a scale previously unimaginable. This was the dawn of the Old Kingdom, a period of unparalleled peace and prosperity, an era that would forever be defined by the colossal monuments its rulers left behind. This is the age of the pyramids, a time when the pharaohs were not just kings, they were gods on earth, and their tombs were not just graves, but gateways to eternity. Our journey into this remarkable era begins with the king of the third dynasty, Djoser, and his brilliant architect, Imhotep. Before Djoser, pharaohs were buried in mastabas, those single-level rectangular tombs we have already encountered. But Imhotep, a man of genius who would later be deified himself, had a revolutionary idea. At Saqqara, the sprawling necropolis overlooking the capital of Memphis, he began construction on a mastaba for his king. But he did not stop there. Upon the initial structure, he added another, smaller mastaba, and then another, and another, until 6 tiers rose towards the sky, creating a structure unlike any the world had ever seen. The step pyramid. This was not merely an architectural innovation. It was a profound religious statement. The pyramid was a stairway to heaven, a physical representation of the king's ascent to the stars, where he would join the circumpolar stars, the eternal ones who never die. The step pyramid was the centerpiece of a vast funerary complex, surrounded by a massive limestone wall and containing courtyards, temples, and chapels designed for the king to perform his royal duties for all eternity. It was a city for the dead, a meticulously planned eternal palace. Imhotep's creation was the first large-scale stone building in history, a testament to the burgeoning power and ambition of the Egyptian state. It was the prototype from which all later pyramids would evolve, the grand ancestor of the architectural wonders to come. The fourth dynasty, which followed, was the true golden age of pyramid building. It began with a king named Sneferu, perhaps the most prolific builder in all of Egyptian history. Sneferu was obsessed with perfecting the pyramid form. His first attempt at Medum began as a step pyramid, but was later encased in smooth limestone to create a true pyramid. Unfortunately, the outer casing collapsed, leaving the tower-like core we see today. Undeterred, Sneferu moved his court to Dashur and began another pyramid. This one, known as the Bent Pyramid, is unique in its appearance. Partway up, the angle of the slope changes abruptly from a steep 54 degrees to a shallower 43 degrees. We can imagine the ancient architects perhaps noticing signs of instability, making a last-minute adjustment to save the structure. Still not satisfied, Sneferu commissioned a third pyramid just a short distance away. This was the Red Pyramid, named for the reddish hue of its core limestone blocks. Here, at last, the architects succeeded. The Red Pyramid is the first successful true pyramid, a perfect, smooth-sided monument that glows a warm, gentle red in the setting sun. Sneferu, the king who built 3 pyramids, had finally achieved the form he sought. He had harnessed immense resources and manpower, refined construction techniques, and in doing so, he paved the way for the most iconic structures in human history. And so we arrive at the Giza Plateau, a place that needs no introduction. It is here that Sneferu's son and successor, Khufu, chose to build his own eternal home. The Great Pyramid of Giza is a monument of such staggering scale and precision that it continues to defy belief. For nearly 4,000 years, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world. It is composed of an estimated 2.3 million stone blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons, all cut and placed with astonishing accuracy. The sides of the pyramid are aligned almost perfectly with the 4 cardinal points, a testament to the Egyptians' advanced knowledge of astronomy. Let us venture inside, into the heart of this stone mountain. A narrow, descending passage leads into the bedrock beneath the pyramid to an unfinished subterranean chamber. From the descending passage, an ascending passage branches upwards, a unique feature in pyramid design. This passage leads to what is known as the Queen's Chamber, a small, gabled room in the heart of the pyramid, though it is unlikely a queen was ever buried here. The true marvel, however, is the grand gallery. This long, corbelled corridor rises at a steep angle, its high walls seeming to reach for the heavens. It is an architectural masterpiece designed to lead to the final resting place of the king. At the top of the grand gallery lies the king's chamber, a simple rectangular room, built entirely of red granite. Inside lies a single granite sarcophagus, the final, empty vessel for the body of King Khufu. Above this chamber, 5 stress-relieving chambers were ingeniously built to distribute the immense weight of the pyramid and protect the king's burial. Chamber from collapse. The construction of such a monument required a level of social and administrative organization that is almost as impressive as the structure itself. For 2 decades, a massive workforce of skilled craftsmen and laborers worked on the pyramid. These were not slaves, as has often been depicted, but free Egyptian citizens. They lived in a well-organized city near the plateau where they were, provided with food, shelter, and medical care. They were conscripted for a period of service, a form of national tax paid in labor, and they took immense pride in their work, leaving behind graffiti on the blocks that read, "The Gang, Friends of Khufu." Khufu's son, Khafre, built his pyramid next to his father's. Though slightly smaller than the Great Pyramid, it appears taller because it was built on a higher section of the plateau. Khafre's pyramid complex is the most complete of the Giza group, with its valley temple, causeway, and mortuary temple still remarkably preserved. And guarding this entire magnificent necropolis is a creature of myth and mystery, the Great Sphinx. Carved from a single outcropping of limestone, it has the body of a lion and the head of a king believed to be Khafre himself. For 4,500 years it has gazed towards the rising sun, a silent, enigmatic guardian of the sacred plateau. The third and smallest of the Giza pyramids was built by Khafre's son, Menkaure. Though his pyramid was smaller, his mortuary temple was filled with some of the most beautiful and naturalistic statues ever carved in the Old Kingdom, depicting the king with his queen and various deities. These statues radiate a sense of calm, divine power, and eternal youth. The society that built these monuments was a highly centralized and hierarchical one, governed by the principle of Mat, the divine concept of order, truth, and justice. The pharaoh was the guarantor of Mat, the link between the gods and humanity. Below him was a complex bureaucracy headed by the vizier, the king's chief minister. The country was divided into provinces or nomes, each administered by a governor, or nomarch, who is responsible for collecting taxes and administering justice. The vast majority of the population were farmers, their lives dictated by the rhythm of the Nile's flood. They worked the land, produced the food that fed the nation, and provided the labor for the great royal construction projects. The religion of the Old Kingdom was deeply connected to the sun god Ra, whose cult grew in prominence throughout this period. The pyramid itself was seen as a solar symbol, a ray of sun petrified into stone. The pharaoh was considered the son of Ra, and upon his death he was believed to ascend to the sky to join his father in his solar bark, sailing across the heavens by day and through the underworld by night. To ensure this journey was successful, the king's body had to be preserved through the elaborate process of mummification. The internal organs were removed and placed in canopic jars, and the body was dried with natron salt before being wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen bandages. Spells and prayers, known as the pyramid texts, were inscribed on the walls of the burial chamber, providing a magical roadmap for the king's journey into the afterlife. But this golden age could not last forever. By the end of the 6th dynasty, the power of the central government began to wane. The immense cost of building and maintaining the pyramid complexes strained the royal treasury. The nomarchs, the provincial governors, grew more powerful, and their offices became hereditary, turning them into a kind of local nobility who challenged the authority of the king. The long 94-year reign of the last major Old Kingdom pharaoh, Pepi II, saw the slow erosion of central power. To compound these political problems, a period of climatic change brought lower than usual Nile floods, leading to famine and social unrest. The divine order of Mat was broken. The Old Kingdom, the age of the pyramids, slowly crumbled, giving way to a period of disunity and chaos. Yet the legacy of this era, etched in millions of tons of stone, would stand as an eternal testament to a time when kings were gods and humanity dared to build for eternity. The fall of the Old Kingdom was not a sudden collapse, but a slow, creeping twilight. The radiant sun of the Pyramid Age set, and Egypt drifted into a century of shadow and fragmentation, known as the First Intermediate Period. The central pillar of Egyptian life, the divine kingship that had guaranteed the cosmic order of Mat, had fractured. Without a strong single ruler in the capital of Memphis, the country splintered into a collection of rival fiefdoms, each controlled by a powerful local ruler. This was a time of profound anxiety and upheaval, a dark chapter in the long history of the Nile Valley. The causes of this decline were complex. The immense economic strain of the pyramid projects had gradually depleted the royal treasury. The pharaohs of the late Old Kingdom had granted vast tracts of tax-exempt land to temples and private individuals, further eroding the state's economic base. The rise of the powerful nomarchs, the provincial governors, created a class of regional lords whose loyalty was first to their own provinces, their own nomes, and only secondarily to a distant king. The final blow may have been environmental. A series of disastrously low Nile floods, brought on by a period of global climate change, led to widespread famine. When the life-giving waters of the Nile failed, the faith of the people in the divine power of their pharaoh was shaken to its core. The king, who was supposed to guarantee the floods and the harvest, had seemingly failed in his most sacred duty. The result was chaos. The unity of the two lands, so powerfully symbolized by the Narmer palette, was shattered. For a time, the kings of the 7th and 8th dynasties still ruled from Memphis, but they were kings in name only. They were ephemeral figures, some reigning for only a few months, their authority barely extending beyond the walls of their capital. The real power lay with the nomarchs, who now ruled their provinces as independent princes. They built their own armies, collected their own taxes, and waged war against their neighbors. The grand narrative of a unified Egypt was replaced by a cacophony of local ambitions. This period of decentralization has often been portrayed as a dark age, a time of complete anarchy and despair. And indeed, for many Egyptians, it was a time of great hardship. Tomb inscriptions from the era speak of hunger, violence, and uncertainty. One text, known as the Admonitions of Epur, paints a bleak picture of a world turned upside down. The land spins round as does a potter's wheel. He laments, the river is blood, ... robbers are everywhere, ... the dead are thrown in the river. While this text is likely a piece of literary fiction, it reflects the deep anxieties of a society that felt its foundations had crumbled. Trade with foreign lands collapsed, and the grand construction projects that had once employed thousands came to a halt. Yet this was not simply an age of destruction. It was also a period of profound cultural change and regional creativity. Freed from the rigid artistic conventions of the royal court at Memphis, local artists developed their own unique styles. The art of the first intermediate period is often more expressive and individualistic than the serene, formal art of the Old Kingdom. We see this in the funerary stelae of the nomarchs, which depict them as powerful rulers in their own right, surrounded by their families and retainers. Perhaps the most significant development of this period was a process that has been called the democratization of the afterlife. In the Old Kingdom, the promise of a glorious eternity was largely reserved for the pharaoh. Only he could join the sun god Ra in his celestial journey. The nobility could hope for an afterlife in the vicinity of their king, but the common people had no such guarantee. Now, with the decline of royal power, the religious focus shifted. The cult of Osiris, the god of the underworld, grew in prominence. Osiris was a god who had died and been resurrected, and he offered the hope of eternal life to all people, regardless of their social status, as long as they lived a righteous life. This new focus on personal piety and morality led to the emergence of a new genre of literature, the coffin texts. These were magical spells and prayers inscribed on the inside of coffins, intended to help the deceased navigate the dangers of the underworld and achieve a blessed afterlife. Unlike the pyramid texts, which were exclusively for royalty, the coffin texts were available to anyone who could afford a decorated coffin. This new religious outlook placed a greater emphasis on individual responsibility and ethical behavior. A person's fate in the afterlife now depended not on their proximity to the king, but on the judgment of their own heart. Out of the turmoil of the first intermediate period, two powerful new political centers emerged to challenge the phantom kings of Memphis. In the north, in the Nile Delta, a dynasty of rulers rose to power in the city of Heracleopolis. These kings of the 9th and 10th dynasties controlled Lower Egypt and parts of Middle Egypt. In the south, a family of ambitious nomarchs in the city of Thebes began to consolidate their power in Upper Egypt. The Thebans were fiercely independent and worshipped the god Montu, a falcon-headed god of war. For decades, Egypt was divided into two warring halves, with the Heracleopolitan kings in the north and the Theban princes in the south locked in a bitter struggle for control of the entire country. The conflict was long and brutal, a civil war that raged up and down the Nile Valley. The border between the two kingdoms shifted back and forth, and tales of battles and sieges are recorded in the tombs of the nomarchs who fought in them. One by one, the Theban rulers expanded their territory northward. Intef I, Intef II, and Intef III, the first Theban kings of the 11th dynasty, slowly but surely pushed back the forces of Heracleopolis. They were warriors, but they were also skilled administrators who brought stability and order back to the lands they conquered. The final victory belonged to a Theban king named Mentuhotep II, around the year 2040 BC. After a long and arduous campaign, Mentuhotep defeated the last of the Heracleopolitan kings and once again united the two lands under a single ruler. He took the Horus name Smetawi, which means he who unites the two lands, a clear statement of his historic achievement. The first intermediate period was over. Mentuhotep II was a pivotal figure in Egyptian history. He was a warrior who reunified his country through force, but he was also a visionary who laid the foundations for a new golden age. He moved the capital to his home city of Thebes, which now became the religious and political center of Egypt. He reorganized the administration of the country, appointing loyal officials to keep the nomarchs in check. And at Deir el-Bahri, on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, he built a magnificent and innovative mortuary temple, a terraced structure that would later inspire the famous temple of Hatshepsut. The first, intermediate period was a traumatic chapter. In the Egyptian story, a time when the world seemed to have been turned upside down. But it was also a period of transformation and rebirth. It tested the resilience of Egyptian culture and found it strong. It broke down old certainties and gave rise to new ideas about religion, society, and the individual's place in the cosmos. Out of the crucible of chaos and conflict, a new, revitalized Egypt was born. The stage was now set for the Middle Kingdom, a period of classical elegance, literary achievement, and renewed pharaonic power. The dark night of disunity had passed, and a new dawn was breaking over the land of the Nile. The reunification of Egypt under Mentuhotep II marked the dawn of a new era of stability and cultural brilliance, the Middle Kingdom. If the Old Kingdom was an age of divine kingship expressed through monumental stone, the Middle Kingdom was an age of refined elegance, introspection, and classical perfection. The pharaohs of this period were not distant, untouchable gods, but rather wise shepherds of their people, a role they took with immense seriousness. This was an age of literary masterpieces, of fortified frontiers, and of a deep and abiding concern for the well-being of the Egyptian state and its subjects. The 11th dynasty, under Mentuhotep II and his successors, had restored order, but it was the 12th dynasty that truly defined the splendor of the Middle Kingdom. The founder of this powerful new line was a man named Amenhotep I, who had likely served as vizier to the last king of the previous dynasty. Amenhotep I was a shrewd and capable ruler who understood the need for a new kind of kingship. He moved the capital from Thebes back to the north, establishing a new city called Ichtoi, Caesar of the two lands, strategically located near the Fayum oasis. This move was symbolic, distancing his rule from the powerful Theban families and placing his administration at the heart of the country he now controlled to secure his dynasty. Amenhotep I introduced the practice of co-regency, crowning his son Senusret I as his co-ruler. This ensured a smooth transition of power and prevented the kind of succession crises that could plunge the country back into chaos. This practice would be followed by the kings of the 12th dynasty for nearly 2 centuries, providing a remarkable period of internal stability. Amenhotep's reign was not without its dangers, however. He was the victim of a palace conspiracy, a tale dramatically recounted in a famous work of literature, the Instructions of Amenhotep, in which the ghost of the murdered king appears to his son to offer advice on kingship. "Beware of subjects who are nobodies," the ghost warns. "Trust not a brother, no, not a friend." This text reveals the deep sense of caution and pragmatism that characterized the rulers of this age. His son, Senusret I, was a great builder and a patron of the arts. He oversaw a flourishing of temple construction throughout Egypt, most notably at Karnak, the growing religious complex dedicated to the state god Amun-Re. Here, Senusret I erected the White Chapel, a small but perfectly proportioned shrine built of brilliant white limestone. Its walls are covered in exquisitely carved reliefs of the king with the gods, considered some of the finest examples of relief carving from any period of Egyptian history. The art of the 12th dynasty reached a level of technical perfection and subtle beauty that would be admired and emulated for centuries to come. It was the classical age of Egyptian art. One of the greatest achievements of the 12th dynasty was the development of the Fayum region. This large oasis, a natural depression to the west of the Nile Valley, was transformed into a vast and fertile agricultural area through a series of ambitious irrigation projects. The pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom, particularly Senusret II and Amenhotep III, saw the potential of this region to increase the country's food supply and wealth. They dredged canals and created an artificial lake, Lake Moeris, to manage the Nile's floodwaters and provide irrigation for thousands of acres of new farmland. The Fayum became the breadbasket of Egypt, a testament to the foresight and engineering prowess of its rulers. While they cultivated the land at home, the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom also looked to secure Egypt's borders. To the south in Nubia lay a land rich in gold, ebony, and ivory. The kings of the 12th dynasty were determined to control this valuable trade route and protect their southern frontier from the powerful kingdom of Kerma. They embarked on a massive campaign of fortification, building a series of formidable mud-brick forts along the Nile in Nubia. These were not simple watchtowers, but massive, complex structures with towering walls, fortified gateways, and intricate internal layouts. Forts like Bahan and Semna were military marvels, designed to withstand siege and project Egyptian power deep into foreign territory. The soldiers stationed there were a permanent military presence, a clear message that Nubia was now under Egyptian dominion. This era of confidence and stability also fostered a golden age of Egyptian literature. For the first time, writing was used not just for administrative or religious texts, but to explore complex themes of morality, justice, and the human condition. The story of Sine is perhaps the most famous work of this period. It tells the tale of a courtier who flees Egypt in fear after the assassination of Amenhotep I. He lives for many years in exile in the Levant, becoming a wealthy and respected chieftain, but he never loses his longing for home. In his old age, he is pardoned by the new pharaoh Senusret I and returns to Egypt to be buried in his native soil. The story is a beautiful and moving exploration of Egyptian identity, loyalty, and the deep love for one's homeland. Other literary works from this period include The Tale of the Eloquent Peasant, a story about a humble farmer who is robbed by a corrupt official and delivers a series of eloquent speeches on justice before the high steward, and The Satire of the Trades, in which a father urges his son to become a scribe by describing the miseries of all other professions. These texts give us an unprecedented insight into the values and concerns of Middle Kingdom society. They show a deep preoccupation with mat or justice and a belief that all people, rich or poor, had a right to be heard. The religious landscape of the Middle Kingdom was dominated by the cult of Osiris. The town of Abydos, believed to be the burial place of Osiris, became the most important pilgrimage site in Egypt. Every year, a great festival was held there, reenacting the myth of Osiris's death and resurrection. People from all over Egypt traveled to Abydos to participate in these rites, hoping to share in the god's promise of eternal life. Many left behind commemorative stelae or small chapels, creating a vast sacred landscape dedicated to the Lord of the underworld. The democratization of the afterlife that had begun in the first, intermediate period was now a central feature of Egyptian religion. The portraits of the late Middle Kingdom pharaohs, such as Senusret III and Amenhotep III, are among the most striking and unusual in all of Egyptian art. Unlike the idealized, eternally youthful faces of Old Kingdom pharaohs, these kings are depicted with a stark, almost brutal realism. Their faces are careworn, lined with the anxieties of rule. Their large ears are a symbolic expression of their willingness to listen to the pleas of their people. These are not the faces of distant gods, but of weary, mortal men, burdened by the immense weight of their responsibilities. They are powerful portraits of a kingship that defined itself by duty and service. Yet, like all golden ages, the Middle Kingdom could not endure forever. The 13th dynasty saw a rapid succession of short-lived kings. The central administration, once so efficient, began to falter. The powerful administrative machine built by the 12th dynasty seemed to run on its own momentum for a time. But the lack of strong leadership at the top began to take its toll. At the same time, a new group of people was settling in the eastern Nile Delta. They came from the Levant, from Canaan and Syria, drawn by the wealth and stability of Egypt. The Egyptians called them Hakakasut, or rulers of foreign lands, a term that would later be corrupted into the Greek name Hyksos. For a time their presence was peaceful, but as the power of the Egyptian pharaohs waned, the influence of these foreign settlers grew. A new time of troubles was on the horizon. The classical age was drawing to a close, and Egypt was once again on the verge of fragmentation and foreign domination. The stability of the mighty 12th dynasty gave way to a slow decline, leading Egypt into another era of division and foreign rule known as the Second Intermediate Period. This was a complex and transformative time, a period when the northern part of the country fell under the control of the Hyksos, a people of Asiatic origin. The memory of this foreign domination would leave a permanent scar on the Egyptian psyche, forever changing its relationship with the outside world. The 13th dynasty, which followed the glorious 12th, was a shadow of its predecessor. It boasted a long list of kings, but most of their reigns were short and ineffective. The central government, based at Itj gradually lost its grip on the country. Power devolved once again to local officials, and the unity of the two lands began to fray. During this period of weakening central authority, the communities of Canaanite immigrants who had been settling in the eastern Nile Delta for generations grew in number and influence. They were skilled traders, metallurgists, and craftsmen, and they brought with them new technologies and cultural practices. Their main center was the city of Avaris, a bustling, cosmopolitan port city in the northeastern delta. Archaeological excavations at Avaris have revealed a culture that was a fascinating blend of Egyptian and Canaanite traditions. The people there built Canaanite-style houses, worshipped Canaanite gods like Baal alongside Egyptian deities, and buried their dead according to their own customs. For a long time, their relationship with the Egyptian state was peaceful, but as the 13th dynasty weakened, the leaders of Avaris became independent rulers. These were the Hyksos. The term, meaning rulers of foreign lands, was originally used by the Egyptians to refer to the chieftains of these foreign people. It was not the name of a specific ethnic group, but a political title. The Hyksos rulers of the 15th dynasty established their own kingdom in the north, with Avaris as their capital. They adopted the titles and trappings of Egyptian pharaohs, writing their names in cartouche and ruling as kings of Lower Egypt. They did not, as was once thought, invade Egypt in a great military conquest. Rather, their rise to power was a gradual process, a slow takeover from within that was possible only because the native Egyptian state had become so weak. The Hyksos brought with them revolutionary new military technologies that would transform the face of warfare in the ancient Near East. The most important of these were the horse-drawn chariot and the composite bow. The chariot was a light, two-wheeled vehicle that provided a mobile platform for archers, giving them a tremendous advantage in speed and maneuverability on the battlefield. The composite bow, made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, was far more powerful and had a longer range than the simple self-bow the Egyptians had been using for centuries. They also introduced new types of bronze swords and daggers, and the use of scale armor. For a time, this military superiority allowed the Hyksos to dominate northern Egypt and exact tribute from the southern part of the country, while the Hyksos ruled the north. A native Egyptian dynasty of kings held on in the south, in their ancestral city of Thebes. This 17th dynasty was essentially a vassal state, forced to pay taxes to the Hyksos king in Avaris. The situation was a deep humiliation for the proud Thebans. A later folk tale, the quarrel of Apepi and Sekenenre, captures the simmering tension between the two powers. In the story, the Hyksos king, Apepi, sends a message to the Theban king, Sikanan Dao, complaining that the roaring of the hippopotami in the sacred pool at Thebes is disturbing his sleep in avarice. Over 400 miles away, the absurd complaint was a clear provocation, a test of the Theban king's submission. The story reflects a historical reality of growing conflict. The Thebans would not tolerate being ruled by foreigners forever. The mummy of Sikanin-Re-Dao in the Cairo Museum tells a gruesome story. His skull is shattered by multiple horrific wounds inflicted by a variety of weapons, including a Hyksos-style battle axe. It seems certain that he died violently, most likely in battle against the Hyksos. He was the first of the Theban kings to rise up against the foreign rulers, and he paid the ultimate price for his courage. But his sacrifice was not in vain. It ignited a war of liberation that would be carried on by his successors. His son, Kamose, the last king of the 17th dynasty, was a fiery and determined warrior. Inscriptions on two stelae he erected at Karnak describe his frustration with the divided state of Egypt. He complains to his council that he is squeezed between the Hyksos in the north and the Nubians of the kingdom of Kerma, who were allied with the Hyksos in the south. His counselors advise caution, but Kamose is determined to fight. "I will grapple with him and rip open his belly," he declares. "My wish is to save Egypt and to smite the Asiatics." Kamose launched a daring raid northward, sailing down the Nile with his army. He captured and destroyed Hyksos-allied towns, intercepted a message from the Hyksos king to his Nubian ally, and even reached the outskirts of Avaris itself, though he was unable to take the city. Kamose's campaign was a major psychological victory. It shattered the illusion of Hyksos invincibility and demonstrated that the Thebans were a force to be reckoned with. He had set the stage for the final act of the drama. The final victory was achieved by Kamose's younger brother, Ramesside. After a long and difficult siege, Ahmose captured the Hyksos capital of Avaris, driving the foreign rulers out of Egypt and back into the Levant. He then marched his army south to Nubia, crushing the kingdom of Kerma and re-establishing Egyptian control over the region. Ahmose had finally reunified Egypt. He was the founder of the 18th dynasty and the first king of a new, glorious era. The new kingdom. The second intermediate period was a time of national trauma, but it was also a crucial catalyst. The Hyksos occupation shattered Egypt's traditional sense of security and isolation. The Egyptians had learned a bitter lesson. The deserts that protected them were not impenetrable. If they were to prevent such a humiliation from ever happening again, they could no longer afford to be passive. They had to become a proactive imperial power. They also learned from their former masters. The Egyptian army was professionalized and reorganized, adopting the very weapons the Hyksos had used against them. The chariot and the composite bow became standard equipment for the new Egyptian military. A new ideology of kingship emerged, one that emphasized the pharaoh's role as a warrior and a conqueror, the divinely appointed leader of a holy war to expand and protect the borders of Egypt. The experience of foreign rule had forged a new, more aggressive and expansionist Egypt. The shame of the Hyksos period would fuel the ambitions of the pharaohs of the new kingdom, who would go on to build one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. the time of troubles was over. A new sun was rising over a reunified and reawakened Egypt, an Egypt that was now ready to take its place on the world stage, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. An age of empire was about to begin. The expulsion of the Hyksos was more than a military victory. It was a profound national rebirth. The humiliation of foreign rule had forged a new Egyptian spirit, one of fierce patriotism and a determination that their sacred land would never again be defiled by invaders. This new spirit gave birth to the new kingdom, the most dynamic and glorious period in Egyptian history. This was the age of empire, of warrior pharaohs and immense wealth, of monumental temples and legendary queens. The pharaoh was no longer just the shepherd of his people. He was the commander-in-chief of a divine military machine, tasked with extending the borders of Egypt to the ends of the earth. Amos-I, the hero of the liberation, was the founder of this new era. His reign was dedicated to consolidating his victory and rebuilding the shattered nation. He rewarded the soldiers who had fought alongside him with grants of land and gold, creating a loyal military class that would form the backbone of the new state. He reopened quarries and mines, restarting the grand construction projects that had been neglected for so long. He restored the temples of the traditional Egyptian gods, honoring them for their role in the victory. And most importantly, he solidified Thebes as the undisputed capital of Egypt. The city's patron god, Amun, who had been a minor local deity, was merged with the sun god Re to become Amun-Ra, the king of the gods and the divine father of the pharaoh. The vast temple complex of Karnak at Thebes became the national shrine, the religious heart of the new empire. The pharaohs who followed Amos the first continued his work, transforming Egypt from a unified kingdom into an imperial power. They understood that to prevent another Hyksos-like invasion, they needed to control the lands from which the threat had come. They created a buffer zone in the Levant, conquering a string of city-states in modern-day Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. This was not just a defensive strategy. It was also immensely profitable. The conquered territories paid vast amounts of tribute in the form of gold, silver, timber, copper, and slaves, filling the coffers of the pharaoh and the temples of Amun-Ra. A new kind of pharaoh emerged, the warrior king. These were not the weary administrators of the Middle Kingdom or the remote god kings of the Old Kingdom. The pharaohs of the new kingdom were athletes, horsemen, and generals who often led their armies into battle personally. Their duty was to uphold Mat, not just within Egypt, but throughout the world, by smashing the forces of chaos wherever they might be found. The walls of the temples were no longer covered with scenes of peaceful ritual, but with dramatic reliefs of the pharaoh in his chariot, trampling his enemies underfoot. Thutmose was one of the first of this new breed of pharaoh. He pushed the boundaries of the Egyptian empire further than ever before. He led his army deep into Nubia, reaching the fourth cataract of the Nile. To mark his victory, he had a great inscription carved on a rock at Kirgis, a clear statement of Egyptian domination. He then turned his attention to the northeast, marching his army across the Sinai and into the Levant. In a remarkable feat of military logistics, he even crossed the Euphrates River into the kingdom of Mitanni, the new great power in Mesopotamia. He erected a victory stela on the banks of the Euphrates, marking the northernmost frontier of his empire. No pharaoh had ever gone so far. Thutmose I also made a significant change in royal burial customs. The pyramids of the Old and Middle Kingdoms were magnificent monuments, but they were also obvious targets for tomb robbers. Thutmose I sought a more secure and secluded resting place. He chose a remote, sun-scorched valley on the west bank of the Nile at Thebes, a desolate place of cliffs and rocks dominated by a natural peak shaped like a pyramid. Here, in what would become known as the Valley of the Kings, he commissioned his architect, Enene, to secretly hew a tomb from the rock. "I supervised the excavation of the cliff tomb of His Majesty," Enene recorded in his own tomb. "Alone, no one seeing, no one hearing." This was the beginning of a tradition that would last for 500 years. For centuries, the pharaohs of the new kingdom would be laid to rest in hidden, richly decorated tombs in this silent valley, their bodies prepared for a journey into an afterlife, filled with unimaginable splendor. The new wealth pouring into Egypt from its empire fueled a building boom on an unprecedented scale. The Temple of Karnak grew from a modest Middle Kingdom shrine into the largest religious complex in the world. Each successive pharaoh added their own pylons, courts, chapels, and obelisks, creating a sprawling, labyrinthine city of God. The temple was not just a place of worship. It was a powerful economic institution. It owned vast tracts of land, herds of cattle, and fleets of ships. Its treasuries were filled with the spoils of war. The high priest of Amun became one of the most powerful and influential figures in the state, second only to the pharaoh himself. The society of the new kingdom was more cosmopolitan and dynamic than ever before. The empire brought Egypt into constant contact with the other great civilizations of the Near East: the Mitannians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, and the Hittites. Diplomats, traders, and tribute-bearers from foreign lands thronged the streets of Thebes and Memphis. Foreign princesses were married to the pharaoh to cement diplomatic alliances, bringing their own retinues and customs to the Egyptian court. The art of the period reflects this new internationalism, with foreign styles and motifs sometimes appearing alongside traditional Egyptian forms. The administration of the empire required a large and sophisticated bureaucracy. Scribes and officials were in high demand. The military also offered a path to advancement for ambitious young men. A new class of professional soldiers and officers emerged, loyal to the pharaoh and enriched by the spoils of war. The new kingdom was an age of opportunity for those with talent and ambition. The foundations of this mighty empire were built on the trauma of the past and the ambition of the present. Ahmose I had healed the nation, and his successors had transformed it into a military and economic superpower. They had created a new Egypt, confident, prosperous, and outward-looking. The stage was set for the zenith of pharaonic power, a period of unprecedented glory when the names of pharaohs like Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, and Amenhotep III would become legendary throughout the ancient world. The empire had been born, and its golden age was about to dawn. The 18th dynasty was the heart of the new kingdom, a period of unimaginable power, wealth, and artistic achievement. The gold of Nubia and the tribute of the Levant flowed into Egypt, funding a century and a half of unparalleled magnificence. This was the age of legendary rulers whose names still echo through history, an age of a woman who ruled as king, a warrior who never lost a battle, and a magnificent pharaoh who presided over an empire at the peak of its glory. Following the death of Thutmose II, the throne passed to his young son, Thutmose III, but the new king was still a child, and so his stepmother and aunt, Queen Hatshepsut, stepped in to rule as his regent. This was not unusual, but Hatshepsut was no ordinary queen. After a few years, she did something unprecedented. She had herself crowned as pharaoh, taking on the full titles and regalia of a king. She was depicted in statues and reliefs with the traditional false beard and male kilt, a clear statement that she was not just a queen regent, but a king in her own right. To legitimize her rule, she commissioned a series of reliefs in her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari that told the story of her divine birth. In these scenes, the god Amun-Ra takes the form of her father, Thutmose I, and impregnates her mother, proclaiming that Hatshepsut is his own child, destined to rule Egypt. Hatshepsut's reign was not one of military conquest, but of peace, prosperity, and trade. Her most famous achievement was a great trading expedition to the distant land of Punt, a place of exotic wonders, probably located somewhere on the coast of modern-day Eritrea or Somalia. A fleet of 5 massive ships sailed down the Red Sea, returning laden with the treasures of Punt: incense, myrrh, ebony, ivory, gold, and, most remarkably, live myrrh trees, which were planted in the courts of her temple. The entire expedition is documented in vivid detail on the walls of her temple at Deir el-Bahari, a masterpiece of Egyptian architecture. Designed by her loyal official and possible lover, Senenmut, the temple is a stunning terraced structure that seems to rise organically from the cliffs behind it. For 20 years, Hatshepsut ruled over a prosperous and stable Egypt. But what of the young Thutmose III, the king she had displaced? He was not imprisoned or exiled, but was raised in the army where he learned the arts of war. When Hatshepsut finally died, Thutmose III at last ascended to the throne as the sole ruler of Egypt. In the last years of his reign, for reasons that are still debated, he ordered that Hatshepsut's name and image be erased from her monuments. Her statues were smashed, and her name was chiseled out of her cartouches, to be replaced by his own or that of his predecessors. It was an attempt to wipe the memory of the female king from history, an attempt that, thanks to the survival of her temple, ultimately failed. Thutmose III, now free to rule in his own right, proved to be one of the greatest military leaders in history. He was determined to reassert Egyptian authority in the Levant, where the local city-state rulers had taken advantage of Hatshepsut's peaceful reign to rebel. Over the course of his long reign, Thutmose III conducted 17 military campaigns into Asia, and he never lost a single one. He was a brilliant strategist and a charismatic leader who earned the title the Napoleon of ancient Egypt. His first and most famous campaign was the Battle of Megiddo. A coalition of Canaanite princes, led by the king of Kadesh, had gathered their forces at the strategic fortress city of Megiddo. Thutmose III's generals advised him to take the easy, open road to the north, but the pharaoh, in a bold and decisive move, chose to lead his army through a narrow, dangerous mountain pass that his enemies believed to be impassable. The gamble paid off. The Egyptian army emerged from the pass directly in front of the city, taking the enemy completely by surprise. The Canaanite forces were routed, and after a 7-month siege, the city of Megiddo surrendered. Thutmose III's victory at Megiddo secured Egyptian control over the northern Levant and became a model of military strategy for generations to come. The annals of his campaigns, carved on the walls of the Temple of Karnak, are a detailed and invaluable record of the birth of the Egyptian Empire. The reigns of Hatshepsut and Thutmose III represented two different sides of pharaonic power: the peaceful, prosperous builder and the invincible warrior. Their successors inherited an empire at the height of its power. The greatest of these was Amenhotep III, who presided over the absolute zenith of Egyptian glory. His reign was a time of unprecedented peace and prosperity, a golden age of diplomacy and art. Amenhotep III was not a warrior king like his grandfather. He was a master diplomat. The great powers of the Near East, Mitanni, Babylon, and the Hittites all vied for his friendship and for the gold of Egypt, which was, as one foreign king wrote, as plentiful as dust. A remarkable archive of diplomatic correspondence from this period, the Amarna letters, discovered at a later capital, reveals a world of intricate international relations, of royal marriages, and of constant requests for Egyptian gold. Amenhotep III married several foreign princesses to cement these alliances, but he never sent an Egyptian princess abroad, stating that from time immemorial, no daughter of the king of Egypt is given to anyone. Freed from the need to wage war, Amenhotep III dedicated himself to building on a colossal scale. He was the greatest builder of the 18th dynasty. At Karnak he added a new pylon and a magnificent colonnaded hall. On the west bank of Thebes he built a massive mortuary temple for himself, so large that it was said to dwarf even the Temple of Karnak. Today, little remains of this temple, except for two gigantic seated statues of the king that once flanked its entrance. These are the famous colossi of Memnon, which have guarded the Theban necropolis for over 3,000 years, silent witnesses to the vanished splendor of Amenhotep the Magnificent. He also built the beautiful Luxor Temple, a shrine dedicated to the celebration of the divine nature of kingship, and a sprawling palace complex at Malkata, complete with a huge artificial lake for the pleasure of his beloved chief wife, Queen Tai. Queen Tai was a remarkable figure in her own right. She was not of royal blood, but the daughter of a powerful provincial official. Yet Amenhotep III made her his great royal wife, and she wielded enormous influence at court. She is depicted in statues and reliefs as the king's equal partner, a testament to the high status of royal women in the 18th dynasty. The art of Amenhotep III's reign reached a new level of sophistication and technical perfection. The formal, heroic style of the earlier New Kingdom gave way to a more elegant and sometimes naturalistic style. The statues of the king from this period are masterpieces of royal portraiture, radiating a sense of serene, divine power. This was Egypt at its most confident, its most wealthy, and its most glorious. The empire seemed eternal, the power of the pharaoh absolute. But even at this moment of supreme achievement, strange new currents were stirring beneath the surface. Amenhotep III began to show a particular devotion to a minor aspect of the sun god, the Aten, or the physical disk of the sun. This seemingly small religious shift would, under his son and successor, erupt into a revolution that would shake the Egyptian empire to its very foundations. The sun of the 18th dynasty was at its noon, but a strange and unexpected twilight was about to fall. The golden age of Amenhotep III gave way to one of the most bizarre and revolutionary periods in all of ancient history. His son and successor, Amenhotep IV, instigated a religious and cultural revolution that turned Egypt on its head. He abandoned the traditional gods of Egypt, closed their temples, and established a new religion based on the worship of a single universal deity, the Aten, the disk of the sun. It was a radical departure from millennia of tradition, a heresy that would have profound and lasting consequences. When Amenhotep IV came to the throne, he initially followed the religious practices of his father, but within a few years his devotion to the Aten grew into an all-consuming passion. He declared that the Aten was not just the chief god, but the only god. All the other gods and goddesses of the Egyptian pantheon, Amun-Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, were declared to be false. This was a shocking act of impiety. For centuries, the power and stability of Egypt had been based on a complex relationship between the pharaoh and a multitude of gods. To deny them was to undermine the very foundations of Egyptian civilization. The main target of the king's new theology was the powerful and wealthy cult of Amun-Ra at Thebes. The priests of Amun had become almost as powerful as the pharaoh himself, and it is likely that the king's religious revolution was also a political move designed to break their power and reassert the supremacy of the pharaoh. In the 5th year of his reign, he changed his name from Amenhotep, which meant Amun is satisfied, to Akhenaten, meaning effective for the Aten. He then made an even more dramatic move. He abandoned the great capital city of Thebes, the heart of the Amun cult, and built a brand new capital city in the middle of the desert, on a site of virgin land where no god had ever been worshipped before. He called it Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, known today as Amarna. Here, in this new city that seemed to spring up out of nowhere, Akhenaten was free to create a new world dedicated to his god. The city was laid out on a vast scale, with great temples, palaces, and administrative buildings. But the temples of the Aten were unlike any that had been built before. Traditional Egyptian temples were dark, mysterious places with a series of enclosed courts and halls leading to a small, dark shrine where the statue of the god was kept. The temples of the Aten were open to the sky, with no roof, so that the rays of the sun god could shine down directly on the worshippers. Akhenaten, his beautiful wife Nefertiti, and their 6 daughters were the sole mediators between the Aten and humanity. Only the royal family truly knew the god. Everyone else had to worship the Aten through them. This new religion was accompanied by a revolutionary new style of art. The formal, idealized art of the previous centuries was abandoned, replaced by a strange, almost grotesque naturalism. Akhenaten himself was depicted with a long, thin face, a slender neck, a pot-belly, wide hips, and spindly legs. His wife, Nefertiti, whose name means "the beautiful one has come," was depicted as a woman of stunning androgynous beauty, most famously in the painted limestone bust discovered at Amarna, one of the most iconic images from the ancient world. The royal family was shown in scenes of intimate, everyday life, playing with their daughters, eating and kissing, a level of informality never before seen in royal art. This Amarna style was a shocking departure from tradition, and its purpose is still debated. Was Akhenaten suffering from a medical condition that gave him his unusual appearance, or was this a deliberate artistic choice designed to depict the pharaoh as a unique, otherworldly being, the physical manifestation of his strange new god? While Akhenaten was absorbed in his religious revolution, the great Egyptian empire built by his ancestors began to crumble. The Amarna letters, the diplomatic archive found at the site, paint a desperate picture of the situation in the Levant. Egyptian vassal kings write letter after letter to the pharaoh, begging for soldiers and support as their cities are attacked by rivals and by the expanding Hittite Empire. "Let the king, my lord, send troops," writes the ruler of Byblus, "for if the king does not send troops, all the lands will be lost to him." But Akhenaten, lost in his theological dreams, seems to have ignored their pleas. His neglect of foreign policy led to the loss of much of the northern empire that Thutmose III had fought so hard to win. Akhenaten's revolution was a top-down affair, imposed on the country by the king. It is unlikely that it was ever popular with the common people, who were attached to their traditional gods and goddesses, the familiar deities who had protected Egypt for centuries. The closure of the temples would have been an economic disaster for thousands of priests, craftsmen, and farmers who depended on them for their livelihood. There must have been deep and widespread resentment against the heretic king. Akhenaten reigned for 17 years. His end is shrouded in mystery. He simply disappears from the historical record. After his death, there was a brief and confusing period with one or two ephemeral rulers, before a young boy of about 9 years old was placed on the throne. His name was Tutankhamun, living image of the Aten, but the old priesthood of Amun was regaining power. Soon the young king changed his name to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. The Amarna revolution was over. Under the guidance of his powerful advisors, the general Horemheb and the elderly official Tutankhamun, issued a restoration stela in which he described the terrible state of the country under Akhenaten and his efforts to restore the old order. The temples of the gods and goddesses ... had fallen into ruin. The stela proclaims the land was in distress ... The gods had turned their backs on this land. Tutankhamun reopened the temples, restored the priesthoods, and moved the court back to Memphis. The city of Akhenaten was abandoned to the desert sands, and the name of the heretic king, Akhenaten, was systematically erased from his monuments. He was referred to in later king lists as that criminal, or the enemy from Akhenaten. Tutankhamun himself did not live long. He died at the age of about 19, under circumstances that are still debated. He was a minor king whose main historical importance was the restoration of the old religion, but he would achieve posthumous fame for one simple reason: the spectacular discovery of his tomb in the Valley of the Kings in 1922 by the British archaeologist Howard Carter. Unlike the other royal tombs, which had been thoroughly robbed in antiquity, Tutankhamun's tomb was almost completely intact. It was filled with a breathtaking collection of treasures: golden chariots, jewel-encrusted thrones, beautiful alabaster. vessels, and, of course, the magnificent solid gold death mask of the young king himself. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb gave the world a dazzling, unparalleled glimpse into the wealth and craftsmanship of the new kingdom. The Amarna period was a strange and fascinating interlude in Egyptian history. It was a revolution that failed, a brief but brilliant flash of radical new ideas that was quickly extinguished. But it left a lasting legacy. It demonstrated the immense power of the pharaoh, who could single-handedly change the course of the nation's culture. But it also showed the deep resilience of Egyptian tradition, which ultimately rejected the king's heresy and returned to the old ways. The trauma of the Amarna period would pave the way for a new dynasty, one that would seek to restore the glory of the empire and erase the memory of the heretic king forever. The end of the 18th dynasty left Egypt in a state of disarray. The Amarna heresy had shaken the country's religious foundations, and the neglect of foreign affairs had weakened its imperial grip. The task of restoring order fell to a new line of kings, a family of military men from the eastern delta, who would become the 19th dynasty. This was the Ramesside period, an era dominated by powerful pharaohs named Ramesses and Seti, who sought to recapture the glory of the empire and leave their own monumental mark on the land of Egypt. The transition to this new dynasty began with Horemheb, the general who had served under Tutankhamun. He eventually became pharaoh himself and spent his reign systematically dismantling the last vestiges of the Amarna period and restoring the traditional order. As he had no son, he chose another military commander, Paramessu, to be his successor. This man ascended the throne as Ramesses I, the founder of the 19th dynasty. His son, Seti I, was a great warrior and builder who consciously emulated the glorious pharaohs of the mid-18th dynasty. He was determined to restore the Egyptian empire to its former extent. He led his armies into the Levant, reconquering lost territories and clashing with the formidable Hittite Empire, which had taken advantage of Akhenaten's neglect to expand into Syria. Seti I's military campaigns are depicted in stunning, dynamic reliefs on the outer walls of the great hypostyle hall at Karnak, a forest of 134 massive columns that he began and his son would complete. But Seti I's most beautiful and enduring legacy is his mortuary temple at Abydos. This temple, dedicated to Osiris and a number of other gods, is considered one of the masterpieces of New Kingdom art. Its reliefs are carved with a delicate, subtle beauty, a classical style that harks back to the finest art of the past. The temple also contains the famous Abydos King list, a chronological list of 76 pharaohs from Mensi to Seti I himself, which has been an invaluable resource for modern historians. Significantly, the list omits the names of the Amarna pharaohs Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and I, as well as Hatshepsut, wiping them from the official record of history. Seti, the first son and successor, was the greatest and most famous pharaoh of the Ramesside period, and perhaps of all Egyptian history. Ramesses II, known to us today as Ramesses the Great. His reign was exceptionally long, lasting for 67 years. He lived into his 90s, fathered over 100 children, and left behind more monuments and statues than any other pharaoh. He was a master of propaganda, a king who understood the power of image and architecture to project an aura of invincible Divine kingship. In the 5th year of his reign, Ramesses II marched his army into Syria to confront the Hittite Empire. The two great powers clashed near the city of Kadesh on the Orontes River. The Battle of Kadesh is one of the most famous and best documented battles in ancient history, largely because Ramesses himself was so proud of his role in it. According to his account, which he had carved on the walls of numerous temples, he was ambushed by the Hittite army and their chariots. The Egyptian forces were thrown into disarray, but Ramesses, with the divine aid of Amun, single-handedly charged the enemy 6 times, holding them off until his reinforcements arrived and saved the day. This heroic account is, of course, royal propaganda. Hittite records suggest the battle was more of a stalemate, but for Ramesses it was a personal triumph that defined his reign. He commissioned a poem and a bulletin describing his bravery, which were inscribed on temples throughout Egypt. The battle ultimately led to a new era of diplomacy. 16 years after the clash at Kadesh, Ramesses II and the Hittite king Hattusili III signed a peace treaty, the earliest surviving international treaty in history. A copy of the treaty, inscribed on a silver tablet, was sent to Egypt, and its text is still preserved on the walls of Karnak. The treaty ushered in decades of peace and prosperity, with the two former enemies exchanging friendly letters and gifts. Ramesses even married 2 Hittite princesses to seal the alliance. With the northern border secure, Ramesses II embarked on a building program of breathtaking ambition, one that rivaled or even surpassed that of the great builders of the past. He completed the great hypostyle hall at Karnak. He built his own massive mortuary temple on the west bank of Thebes, the Ramesseum. He built a new capital city in the eastern delta, near the old Hyksos center of avarice, called Pi-Ramesses, or House of Ramesses, a vibrant, cosmopolitan city that became the new administrative and military heart of the empire. But his most awe-inspiring creation is located far to the south, in Nubia, the great rock-cut temples of Abu Simbel. 2 temples were carved directly out of a mountainside. The larger temple is dedicated to Ramesses himself, depicted as a living god. Its facade is dominated by 4 colossal, 67-foot-high seated statues of the pharaoh, staring out across the Nile with an expression of serene, eternal power. Twice a year, on the dates of his coronation and his birth, the rays of the rising sun penetrate deep into the temple's inner sanctuary, illuminating the statues of the gods and of Ramesses himself. The smaller temple is dedicated to his great royal wife, Nefertiti, for whom he also built one of the most beautiful tombs in the Valley of the Queens. The temples of Abu Simbel were a clear and powerful statement of Egyptian might, intended to awe the Nubians and any other foreigners who might pass by. Ramesses the Great's long reign was a final, brilliant burst of new kingdom glory. He was the last of the truly great pharaohs, a figure who embodied the power and confidence of imperial Egypt. He became the model of kingship for all his successors. 9 later pharaohs would take his name in an attempt to capture some of his magic. But the world was changing. New peoples were on the move, and new threats were gathering on the horizon. The golden age of Ramesses the Great was the empire's. Magnificent Indian summer, a last period of warmth and light before a long, slow twilight began to fall. The colossal reign of Ramesses the Great was a difficult act to follow. The pharaohs who came after him ruled in his long shadow, facing a world that was becoming increasingly unstable and violent. The late New Kingdom was a time of immense challenges, of foreign invasions, internal decay, and the slow, inexorable decline of pharaonic power. The empire's golden age had passed, and a long, drawn-out twilight had begun. Ramesses II's 13th son and successor, Merneptah, inherited the throne. At an old age, he also inherited a growing crisis on his western frontier. For centuries, Libyan tribes had been migrating towards the fertile lands of the Nile Delta. Now, they were joined by a new and mysterious confederation of peoples who were on the move. Across the eastern Mediterranean, Egyptian texts call them the Sea Peoples. Merneptah faced a major invasion of the western delta by a coalition of Libyans and Sea Peoples. He met them in a great battle and won a decisive victory, which he celebrated on a stela erected in his mortuary temple. This stela, known as the Merneptah Stele or the Israel Stele, is famous for containing the earliest known extra-biblical reference to Israel, which it lists among the peoples and places Merneptah claims to have conquered in a campaign in Canaan. The threat of the Sea Peoples did not go away. They were a symptom of a widespread and violent upheaval that was shaking the ancient Near East to its foundations. The great Hittite Empire collapsed. Major cities in Cyprus, Syria, and Canaan were destroyed. This was a time of chaos and mass migration, a world war of the late Bronze Age. Egypt, though weakened, was one of the few ancient powers to survive. The onslaught, the final and greatest confrontation with the Sea Peoples, came during the reign of Ramesses III, the second king of the 20th dynasty and the last great warrior pharaoh of the New Kingdom. He consciously modeled himself on his famous namesake Ramesses II. He had to. He faced a massive two-pronged invasion by the Sea Peoples, who came by land and by sea, their goal not just to plunder, but to settle in Egypt with their families. Ramesses III met them in a series of decisive battles. On land he defeated their army as it marched down the coast from Syria. At sea, in the mouths of the Nile Delta, the Egyptian fleet engaged the Sea People's ships in a dramatic naval battle. The Egyptian reliefs depicting this battle show a chaotic scene of hand-to-hand combat on the decks of the ships, with Egyptian archers raining arrows down on the enemy. Ramesses III was victorious, and he saved Egypt from the destruction that had overwhelmed so many of its neighbors. He commemorated his victories in magnificent reliefs on the walls of his great mortuary temple at Medinet Habu on the west bank of Thebes. These reliefs are a vital source of information about the Sea Peoples, showing their distinctive feathered headdresses, their ships, and their families in ox carts. Ramesses III had saved Egypt, but the war had been costly, and the country was exhausted. The effort of repelling the invaders had drained the treasury and weakened the state. The later years of Ramesses III's reign were beset by problems. Economic troubles led to the first recorded strike in history, when the workmen building the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings did not receive their grain rations and laid down their tools in protest. "We are hungry," they complained. The incident was a sign of the government's growing inability to manage its own affairs. The reign ended in violence and intrigue. Ramesses III was the victim of a palace conspiracy, A harem conspiracy hatched by one of his minor wives who wanted to place her own son on the throne. Papyri from the subsequent trial reveal the plot, which involved magic and assassination. The mummy of Ramesses III shows a deep, fatal wound to his throat. The plot failed, but the fact that it could happen at all was another sign of the decay of royal authority. The long line of pharaohs who followed Ramesses III, from Ramesses IV to Ramesses Shi, presided over a period of steady decline. Their names were great, but their power was a pale reflection of their predecessors. The empire in Asia was completely lost. Nubia eventually broke away. The unity of Egypt itself began to fracture. The main challenge to the pharaoh's authority came from the increasingly powerful high priests of Amun at Thebes. The priesthood had grown immensely wealthy from the spoils of empire, and the high priest was now the de facto ruler of Upper Egypt, with his own army and administration. This period of decline was also marked by a wave of tomb robberies. The fabulous wealth buried with the pharaohs in the Valley of the Kings proved too great a temptation in an age of economic hardship and weak government. Official court documents from the reign of Ramesses I record the investigation and trial of gangs of tomb robbers who had systematically plundered the royal necropolis. The testimony reveals a network of corruption that sometimes reached high levels of the local administration. Eventually, the situation became so dire that the priests of Amun decided to take matters into their own hands. They opened the royal tombs one by one, stripped the mummies of their remaining valuables for the state treasury, and then reburied the royal ancestors in secret, hidden caches to protect them from further desecration. It was the ultimate admission of failure. The state could no longer protect its own god-kings even in death. The end of the new kingdom came during the reign of Ramesses XI. By this time, the country was effectively split in two. The pharaoh ruled, in name from his capital in the north, Pi-Ramesses, but the real power in the south was held by the high priest of Amun at Thebes, a man named Herihor. When Ramesses XI died, the unity of the new kingdom died with him. Egypt entered a new period of division and weakness. The glorious age of empire was over. The long twilight had finally given way to night. The end of the new kingdom was not a violent collapse, but a slow unraveling. The glorious unified empire of the Ramesside pharaohs gave way to the third intermediate period, a long and complex era of political fragmentation and foreign rule. The divine authority of the pharaoh, once the bedrock of Egyptian civilization, was now fractured, shared between rival dynasties and foreign invaders. Yet, even in this age of weakness, the cultural vitality of Egypt endured, and the dream of a unified kingdom never fully died. The period began with the country divided. In the north, a new dynasty of kings, the 21st, ruled from the city of Tanis in the Nile Delta. These were the legitimate successors of the Ramesside pharaohs, but their authority was limited. In the south, Upper Egypt was controlled by the powerful high priests of Amun at Thebes, who ruled as virtual kings, though they usually paid lip service to the authority of the Tanite pharaoh. Egypt was a diarchy, a kingdom of two halves. The great royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings were abandoned and sealed. The pharaohs of Tanis were now buried in modest stone tombs within the temple enclosure of their capital city. When these tombs were discovered intact in the 1940s, they revealed treasures of gold and silver, including magnificent funerary masks, but on a far smaller scale than the splendors of Tutankhamun. The political weakness of Egypt during this time left it vulnerable to outside influence. For centuries, Libyans had been settling in the Nile Delta, often as soldiers in the Egyptian army. These Libyan military leaders gradually became a powerful aristocracy. Around 945 BC, one of these commanders, a man of Libyan descent named Shoshink, seized the throne, founding the 22nd dynasty. Shoshink was a strong and energetic ruler who managed to briefly reunite Egypt. He tried to revive the imperial glories of the past, launching a major military campaign into Palestine and Israel, an event that is likely recorded in the Bible as the campaign of King Shishak. He even began new construction at the Temple of Karnak, but the unity he forged was short-lived. Under his successors, the country once again fragmented. Rival branches of the royal family and local Libyan chieftains carved out their own little kingdoms, particularly in the Nile Delta. Egypt became a patchwork of competing city-states, a situation reminiscent of the earlier intermediate periods as Egypt fragmented. A new power was rising to the south in Nubia. The Nubians, who had been dominated by Egypt for centuries during the New Kingdom, had formed their own powerful kingdom, centered at the city of Napata. This was the kingdom of Kush, the Kushite. Kings deeply admired Egyptian culture. They worshipped Egyptian gods, used Egyptian hieroglyphs, and built small, steep-sided pyramids for their tombs. They saw themselves not as foreign conquerors, but as pious restorers of the true Egyptian tradition, which they believed the squabbling Libyan princes in the north had abandoned. Around 730 BC, the Kushite king, Pi, decided to intervene. He led his army north on a mission he described as a holy war to restore order and piety to the land of Amin. On a great victory stela, Pi details his campaign, conquering the cities of Egypt one by one and forcing the local rulers to submit. To him, he was crowned as Pharaoh, the founder of the 25th dynasty. For the first time in its history, Egypt was ruled by a line of black pharaohs from Nubia, the Kushite pharaohs. Like Taharka, were great builders who sought to revive the classic art and architecture of the Old and Middle Kingdoms. They brought a new sense of vitality and purpose to Egypt, but their reign coincided with the rise of the most ruthless and militaristic empire the ancient world had yet seen, Assyria. The Assyrians, based in modern-day Iraq, were expanding their empire westward, and Egypt was in their sights. The two great powers clashed over control of the Levant. The Assyrian army was a brutal and efficient war machine. In a series of devastating invasions, the Assyrian kings Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal drove the Kushites out of Egypt and back to Nubia. They sacked the great city of Thebes, an event that sent shockwaves through the ancient world. The Assyrians, however, did not have the manpower to occupy Egypt permanently. They preferred to rule through local vassal kings. One of these was a prince from the city of Sais in the western delta, a man named Psamtik I. When the Assyrian Empire began to weaken due to internal problems, Psamtik cleverly used Greek mercenaries to drive out the remaining Assyrian garrisons and reunite Egypt under his rule. He founded the 26th dynasty, also known as the Saite dynasty. This was a period of revival, a last great flourishing of native Egyptian rule, known as the Saite Renaissance. The Saite pharaohs looked to the distant past for inspiration, consciously arcasing their art, religion, and literature, modeling them on the glories of the Old and Middle Kingdoms. The economy boomed thanks to increased trade with the Greek world. The Greeks established a major trading post in the delta city of Naucratis. It was an age of nostalgia, a final, brilliant sunset for pharaonic civilization. But this independence was not to last. A new superpower was rising in the east, the Persian Empire. In 525 BC, the Persian king Cambyses II, son of Cyrus the Great, invaded Egypt. At the Battle of Pelusium, the Egyptian army was defeated. The last Saite pharaoh, Psamtik III, was captured, and Egypt became a satrapy, a province of the vast Persian Empire. For most of the next 2 centuries, Egypt would be ruled from afar by a Persian king. There were several Egyptian rebellions, but they were all eventually crushed. The age of the pharaohs seemed to be over for good. But history had one more dramatic chapter in store for the land of the Nile. A new conqueror was about to appear. On the horizon, a young man from Macedonia who would change the world forever. The conquest of Egypt by the Persians marked a new and definitive phase in its long history. For the first time, the country was absorbed into a vast foreign empire, its fate dictated by a distant king. The age of native pharaonic rule was over. But the story of ancient Egypt was not. A new chapter was about to begin, one in which Egyptian civilization would blend with a vibrant and dynamic new culture from across the Mediterranean, creating a final fascinating synthesis before the curtain fell for good. For nearly 200 years, Egypt was a province of the Persian Empire. The Persian kings, such as Darius the Great, were generally tolerant rulers. They respected Egyptian customs and religion, and sometimes even adopted the title of pharaoh. Darius completed the construction of a canal connecting the Nile to the Red Sea, boosting trade and the economy. But Egyptian resentment at being ruled by foreigners always simmered beneath the surface. Several heroic but ultimately doomed rebellions broke out as native leaders tried to reclaim their country's independence. These brief interludes of freedom were always crushed by the might of the Persian army. Then, in 332 BC, a new force swept across the ancient world. Alexander the Great, the brilliant young king of Macedonia, defeated the Persian Empire in a series of lightning-fast campaigns. When he arrived in Egypt, he was not seen as a conqueror, but as a liberator. The Egyptians welcomed him with open arms, weary of Persian rule. Alexander showed great respect for their traditions. He made a pilgrimage to the oracle of Ammon at the Siwa oasis, where the priests famously acclaimed him as the son of the god, and therefore the legitimate pharaoh of Egypt. Alexander's most lasting contribution to Egypt was the foundation of a new city on the Mediterranean coast. He chose a spot near a small fishing village called Rakotis and laid out the plans for a great new metropolis. He named it, with his customary lack of modesty, Alexandria. This city would become the new capital of Egypt, and for centuries it would be the intellectual, cultural, and economic center of the entire Mediterranean world. It was a city designed to be a bridge between the Greek world and the ancient land of Egypt, After Alexander's untimely death, his vast empire was divided among his generals. Egypt fell to one of his most trusted commanders, a shrewd and capable man named Ptolemy. Ptolemy initially ruled as a governor, but in 305 BC he declared himself king, taking the title Ptolemaic Soter, or Savior. He was the founder of the Ptolemaic Dynasty, a line of Greek-speaking pharaohs who would rule Egypt for the next 300 years. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt as a Greek kingdom, but they were clever enough to also present themselves to their Egyptian subjects as traditional pharaohs. They were crowned in Memphis, built magnificent new temples to the Egyptian gods at places like Edfu, Dendera, and Philae, and had themselves depicted in the traditional pharaonic style on the temple walls. But their administration was thoroughly Greek. They ran Egypt as a highly efficient and profitable family business, with a Greek-speaking bureaucracy and a Greek army to enforce their rule. Alexandria became a beacon of Greek culture, home to the Great Library, which aimed to collect all the world's knowledge, and the museum, a research institution that was home to some of the greatest minds of the Hellenistic age, including Euclid, the father of geometry, and Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the earth. A fascinating hybrid culture developed. In Alexandria, Greek and Egyptian ideas mingled. A new god, Serapis, was created, combining aspects of the Egyptian god Osiris Apis with Greek gods like Zeus and Hades, in an attempt to create a deity that would appeal to both communities. The Rosetta Stone, the famous decree that allowed modern scholars to decipher hieroglyphs, is a perfect product of this era. It is written in 3 scripts, hieroglyphic and demotic for the Egyptians, and Greek for the ruling class. The Ptolemaic dynasty was characterized by immense wealth and splendor, but also by vicious internal power struggles. The later Ptolemies were a gallery of weak and often corrupt rulers, and the dynasty was plagued by sibling rivalry, intrigue, and murder. As the power of the Ptolemies declined, a new, formidable power was rising in the West, Rome. The Romans began to interfere more and more in Egyptian affairs, seeing the country's immense grain wealth as a vital strategic prize. The final act of the Ptolemaic drama and of ancient Egyptian independence was played out by its last and most famous ruler, Cleopatra VII. She was a brilliant and ambitious queen, the only one of the Ptolemies to bother learning the Egyptian language. She was determined to restore the power and glory of her kingdom. To do this, she allied herself with the most powerful men in Rome. First, she captivated Julius Caesar, who helped her secure her throne and with whom she had a son, Caesarion. After Caesar's assassination, she formed a legendary political and romantic alliance with the Roman general Mark Antony. Together, they dreamed of ruling a great Eastern empire from Alexandria, but their ambitions brought them into direct conflict with Caesar's heir, Octavian. In 31 BC, the naval forces of Antony and Cleopatra clashed with the fleet of Octavian at the Battle of Actium in Greece. They were decisively defeated. Octavian pursued them to Egypt, with his army at the gates of Alexandria. Antony took his own life. Cleopatra, seeing that all was lost, and unwilling to be paraded through the streets of Rome as a captive in Octavian's triumph, famously chose to die by her own hand, traditionally by the bite of an asp. With the death of Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of Egypt the Ptolemaic dynasty came to an end. In 30 BC, Octavian, soon to be known as the Emperor Augustus, annexed Egypt, turning it into a Roman province. It would become the personal breadbasket of the Roman emperors. The story of ancient Egypt as an independent civilization, a story that had lasted for 3,000 years, was finally over. The land of the pharaohs, the pyramids, and the gods had given its final bow on the stage of history. And so, our long journey through the annals of ancient Egypt comes to a close. We have traveled from the misty dawn of the Predynastic period, where small communities first gathered along the life-giving Nile, to the grand and final act of Queen Cleopatra. We have witnessed the rise of the first pharaohs, the unification of the two lands, and the breathtaking ambition of the Old Kingdom, an age that raised mountains of stone to ferry its kings to the stars. We have navigated the turbulent waters of the intermediate periods, times of chaos and division that tested the resilience of the Egyptian spirit, and from which it always re-emerged, revitalized and renewed. We have walked through the classical elegance of the Middle Kingdom, an age of wise rulers and profound literature. We have felt the national shame of the Hyksos occupation and the triumphant birth of the new kingdom empire that followed, an era of warrior pharaohs, immense wealth, and imperial glory. We have stood in awe before the golden treasures of Tutankhamun, puzzled over the strange heresy of Akhenaten, and marveled at the monumental legacy of Ramesses the Great. We have followed the empire through its long twilight, as it faced invasions and internal decay, and we have seen it fracture and fall under the rule of Libyans, Nubians, Persians, and Greeks. For 3 millennia, this remarkable civilization flourished, leaving behind a legacy that has captivated and inspired humanity. For centuries, it gave us monumental architecture, pioneering achievements in science and medicine, a complex and beautiful writing system, and a profound and enduring vision of the afterlife. Through all its triumphs and tribulations, its golden ages, and its times of trouble, it was held together by powerful, unifying threads, the predictable rhythm of the Nile, the divine concept of Mak, and the unwavering belief in an eternal life beyond the mortal realm. The story of ancient Egypt is a testament to the enduring power of human creativity, resilience, and the quest for eternity. Its monuments still stand, silent sentinels in the desert sand, and its stories still whisper to us across the vast expanse of time. As you drift now into the quiet realm of sleep, perhaps you will dream of golden pyramids against a turquoise sky, of sailing on the majestic Nile, or of walking through the columned halls of Karnak. Let the echoes of this ancient world be a soothing lullaby, a gentle reminder of the great river of time on which we all float. Thank you for joining me on this journey. May your rest be deep and your dreams be peaceful. Good night.